Smoak, Paul Catalina, David Smoak. Hello, Joshua. Thanks for your time. Your thoughts about the Buckeyes and trying to defend the championship, and then on top of that, even though they're loaded, opening up at home against a team like UT.
Well, thanks for having me back. I'll start with the second part. That's going to be a hell of a game, right? And that's going to be a tough challenge for Ohio State. I've got a lot of respect for the Texas program, what Steve Sarkisian's done over the last few years, and they're loaded. They did a lot of what Ohio State did last year in terms of roster construction. They spent the money to be able to retain players to go out and get players that they felt they needed. So they'll be coming in loaded. They'll be coming in hungry too, considering what happened in the semifinal last year. And for Ohio State, I think they're really talented. I think they're going to be really good. But what they're up against is a roster that's turned over. They had a lot of players that left through the draft, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. So they've got to get that together. There's a quarterback competition, and Ryan Day would not announce who a starter was here at Media Days. He said there's still more competition to go there. So a bunch of different faces, and having to walk into the horseshoe in week one against an opponent like Texas is going to be a tough start. Then you look down the schedule. Of course, there are a couple of other games that they're going to have to circle that could be losable games. So you're looking at a team that's probably going to be in the 10-win range, but like it could be a 9-win team. It could be an 11 or 12-win team. We just don't know yet.
I was just about to ask you that, Joshua, that they, like, because of the way their schedule works out, they've got some gaps where it looks like they could maybe go on some runs if they bring it together. But, you know, Washington could be really improved. Illinois is nobody to mess with. Penn State is coming in very confident among all that. And then, of course, you've got the big bad Wolverines who've been Ryan Day's a thorn in his side at the end of the year. So could this team look really good but be 9-3 was my question. I think you already kind of answered it.
I think so, right? And like that's the weird thing about the era that we're in with these conferences, as bloated as they are, is you could get a schedule where, of course, you've got Penn State and Michigan, but also in a year where Washington might be better, and Damon Williams is here today, and you know he's one of the guys that everybody's raving about. It could be one of the breakout stars in college football. It's not going to be a surprise if Illinois is good this year. Everybody's talking about them, but Ohio State has to play that game. I believe they have to go on the road to do it. So you could be looking at a team with a couple of bumps and bruises. They went into the playoffs, by the way, last year with 2 losses, right? So, you know, not too far off of what happened a year ago, a really good team that had to take their lumps. It could be similar this year, but I do think there is an opportunity that they step back. They just might not be as good as they were a year ago because they were so veteran and had so many great players that went off to the NFL.
Josh, when you take away the top part of the league, that's the usual. So like Michigan, Ohio State, we know are always mentioned right off the top. You've got Penn State that's getting a lot of pub as like basically the favorites heading into this season. So let's take those 3 out of the equation and maybe even taking Oregon out, okay, just for the sake of we think they're going to be pretty sturdy every year. Who in those Illinois, the Nebraskas, the Indianas, those types of teams, and maybe even some that have been towards the bottom, who are some of those or one of those that you're buying stock on that you feel like could take a big step and maybe make things interesting this year?
Yeah, I mean, everybody should be buying their stock in Illinois. They're super veteran, and Brett Bielema, you know, people joke about him. I think he's a phenomenal ball coach. Like I've watched his meetings, I've watched him coach in practice, and I think he does a lot of the things that the great coaches do in terms of coaching his team. You mentioned Nebraska. I think they're going to be an interesting team this year. They could win 10 games because their schedule sets up for them to do so, right? Like they avoid some of the bigger challenges that, you know, a Wisconsin this year where they've got to play Ohio State and Michigan and Oregon. I think they've got SC on there. They got to play Iowa. Like Nebraska's schedule doesn't look quite like that. So it's almost the Indiana thing from a year ago where they got picked on because of their schedule, but it also allowed that program to elevate and play some really good ball. So if I had to pick 2 out specifically, Illinois is one that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, and keep your eye out for Nebraska because I think the path sets up for them.
Joshua, how hard is it to try to even figure out the tiers when you have that many teams in a conference? Like everybody now, the Power 4, 16, 17, 18 teams, to try to even put your arms or hands around it?
It's insane. And, you know, it's one of the conversations that's popped up here at Media Days. They asked the coaches and they asked the commissioner, Tony Petitti, yesterday about the scheduling. And a lot of it was because of the proposed playoff format that the Big Ten likes, where Big Ten, SEC would get 4 AQs. Big 12 and the ACC would get 2. You have the at-larges there, but it's a 9-game conference schedule, but even that doesn't feel like enough to get a good gauge on where everybody actually stacks up, because you can miss so many teams in the scheduling. Big Ten tries to do it in a balanced way where they look at a rolling average of the last handful of years when they're putting the schedules together. But again, you could be Indiana and all of a sudden you're really good, or you could be Washington and Michigan, who played a national championship game and then took a big step back, and now somebody else's schedule that was supposed to be tough is much easier. So it's difficult. It's a challenge. I don't know if there's like an apparent solution to it. And everybody in the conference office is not just the Big Ten, are taking a look at how they can make sure their schedules are balanced and have the best look at their conference. So at the end of the year, their best teams are actually getting into the playoff.
Oregon, when you talk about schedules, this is a year where the schedule kind of worked out for Oregon in that, at least on paper, right now they only have 2 teams that are preseason ranked in Penn State and Indiana, and those are back-to-back games with a bye in between. But if no one in their schedule improves greatly, which the last 4 games could kind of throw that into a mix, but is this a team that could kind of coast for a little while?
I think so, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I think they're really talented, but they're losing some big pieces as well. Some pieces on defense, obviously. Dylan Gabriel not coming back at quarterback. They've got Dante Moore stepping in there, so they're going to have growing pains and some things to figure out. But once again, the way the schedule works out for them, they could get it done. It's interesting. Dan Lanning spoke this morning at the podium, and he said that their mantra for this year is double down. And in their first year in the Big Ten, they come in, they win the conference. And I think they knew that they could do it. But the whole conversation last year for the West Coast teams, are you tough enough to come into the Big Ten? Can you hang out with the big boys? Do you have the trench play? And Oregon always knew that they did. And so I think they want to go back and do it again. It's going to be with a different team. But to the question that you were asking, I think there'll be growing pains, but I think that they're so talented that they can grow past them. So by the end of the year, they're playing great ball.
What are your thoughts on this point? At this point on Lincoln Riley and where USC finds itself? It feels like they should be a much bigger part of the conversation, just brand-wise, of course, but Oregon's clearly the team from the pack that's taken all the top spots in the headlines and everything, and it just feels like the Trojans have been sort of floundering. How do you feel about them, and do you expect any sort of a significant change this season?
I mean, this is a year, I think, where the pressure is on for Lincoln Riley, and folks have talked about this. Like, his buyout is prohibitive, and even for, USC West Coast money, like, he's pretty locked in. But you're getting to that point where if this year isn't an improvement over what they did a year ago, and to be fair to them, they were in a lot of really close games. Their losses weren't just like super embarrassing, get run off the field. They were in 1-possession games that they just couldn't pull out. They had Penn State on the ropes in the middle of the season. That was a game that they easily should have won, and they didn't, off of a couple of 4th and 15s. All that to say, they got to win those games this year. And if Lincoln Riley doesn't, I think it gets a little bit weird out west for him. I think he'll have lost a good portion of the fan base. I think it becomes more difficult to recruit, and that's something he has to continue to get better at. So I think they have the opportunity to make the improvement, but this has to be the year that they really step it up.
Joshua, the Big Ten has the last 2 national titles, and both of those teams in the end were just dynamic. We know Michigan with some of the drama, then Ohio State makes the run. They're good at that. You were a part of that team in 15 that made that run and ended up bludgeoning everybody in your way. What does it mean that the Big Ten won a couple of national titles, and do they need to win a chunk more for people to realize that the SEC is not the only one with a bunch of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get interesting in terms of narratives here because, as you mentioned, back-to-back titles. If you look at the semifinals for the college football playoff, you had Texas out of the SEC, and then you had a couple of Big Ten teams and another team from the Midwest in Notre Dame, right? And the talent certainly is in the South, but these big national programs can recruit everywhere. And so I think the rosters are top end as talented, where the SEC to me always had the advantage is their 2s and their 3s were NFL players. And we had it like that at Ohio State, but not everybody in the Big Ten did. And when Urban came in 2012, one of the things that he bemoaned to the other coaches, to the commissioner at the time, was the fact that the Big Ten was not an elite recruiting conference. It wasn't really a national recruiting conference, and they had to change that, and that's happened. So the depth piece comes in with the portal, where the SEC, your 2s and 3s that are NFL guys are not sticking around if they're not playing the way that they used to. And so I think the competitive balance has shifted to more of a neutral spot. I'm not here to say that the Big Ten has overtaken the SEC by any means, but I think their opportunity is just as good as the SEC in any given year. And I think the further we get into this, with Penn State now as maybe the top team in the country, maybe Penn State or Texas in a lot of people's eyes, Big Ten's right there.
So